Our speaker tonight is a master storyteller, often using the mediums of gaming, VR, and print. He is the founder of the award-winning gaming and entertainment company 6 to Start, co-creator of Zombies Run, the hugely successful running app with 3 million downloads since 2012, and he's the author of A History of the Future in 100 Objects. Please welcome Adrian Hun.
Thank you. Just to check, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay. All right. So thank you for the very kind introduction, Sarah, and I'm delighted to be the first European speaker, I think, so hope I do a good job. So I want to start with a story. Now, I was born in the UK. Actually, I was born in Birmingham, although I don't have a Birmingham accent, you might not have noticed. But my parents are from Hong Kong. And it wasn't until I was 7 or 8 that I actually traveled to Hong Kong for the first time. Back then, it was quite a different city. When we came into land at the airport in Kowloon, and Kowloon Bay is very different. Now the airport has its own island. Back then, you actually descended between skyscrapers. It was pretty exciting. One of the things that we did when we were in Hong Kong is we went and visited my grandparents, because that's where they were still staying. And they lived quite near the airport. And, they support us like crazy, me and my brother. And, but, my parents and grandparents would go out and do some tourism, and they would leave us with some next door neighbors. And we'd play on their, consoles and their massive stuff. And these neighbors, they had their grandmother. She was Auntie Agatha, we call her, because, that's what you just call, even though she wasn't our aunt, we just call her Auntie Agatha. And she was very smart. She traveled all around the world. She was a real adventurer. But she had an accident, and she was disabled. She wasn't able to walk. But she still wanted to be really helpful and really useful around the house. It's a multi-generational household. You had the kids, parents, and grandparents all living under the same roof. And so what she did was you kind of had a chair in the corner of the room, of the living room, kind of positioned so that she could go and see, everyone. And she'd take care of us kids when we were there playing, make sure we wouldn't go and smash anything up or get into trouble. But she'd also just be really kind of attentive. So, if you were going out and you'd forgotten your keys to the car or to the apartment, she'd make sure, that you had them. If the kids were going out to school and they'd forgotten, their books or something like that, then she would go and remind you, you forgot your homework. And, even when there's a cleaner, trying to sort of mop the floors or vacuum or something like that, she would, tell, look, you missed that spot, you need to go and, catch that. So she was really just watching all the time, eagle eyes. And so you can pretty much figure out where I'm going with this. It's 2027 now. We all have Auntie Agatha in our houses, in every room, watching us, taking care of us. And, it's really been one of the massive technological revolutions, a big technological success story, at least from a kind of commercial point of view, over the last 10 years, almost paralleling the kind of revolution of smartphones from 2007 to 2017. You can really see that through the fact that right now, 8 out of every 10 UK homes have multiple cameras. More homes have a single camera, but 8 out of every 10 UK homes have multiple cameras, and it's similar across the entire world. And you can really see that also reflected through shipments. So home camera shipments from 2018, when this really got started, through to 2027, we've started getting towards the sort of middle part of the S-curve here, but we've got something like 1.5 billion home camera shipments this year. It's so big, obviously, you can sell multiple cameras to the same home. So I really want to talk over the next half an hour about how we got here. What actually happened, why are home cameras so useful that we've invited surveillance into our homes on a massive basis. Well, there have been some technological changes that have made this possible. And I want to sort of talk through that first. The first thing has really just been about, actually, before I talk about that, here are some of the cameras that we had in 2017. I mean, it's kind of a bit ridiculous. One of the things, actually, you'll notice is that all these cameras are wired, which is unusual for today. Because obviously, wired cameras, they require power. Sometimes they require network connections. That makes it very difficult for people to go and set up. You can't really move them around like we do now. You can't map them outside. You have to go and nail them in. That's something, of course, that we changed over the last few years as we transitioned from wired to battery-powered home cameras, 1 week, 1 month battery, 1 month battery, through to charging at a distance using residence charging. And that's, of course, fairly new. People were experimenting with resonance charging and charging at a distance back in 2016, 2015. But when we really got that working in the early 20s, that allowed us to develop all sorts of devices, including home cameras, that could just be placed anywhere. They didn't need any kind of wide connection. They didn't need to be recharged at all. Of course, one of the things that allows is for you to completely waterproof and completely lock down the device. It doesn't need any ports. It can just sit there, basically. So it means you can put them outside or in the bathroom, wherever you want. But the real revolution in these cameras has really come through sensing, because that's obviously what we use these cameras for. And so the early cameras in 2015, 2016, they were high-definition cameras. I mean, we wouldn't really recognize that term now. 1080p cameras, that means the number of vertical lines. Then 4K, which is the other way around, high-speed 4K. What that allowed us to do when that was introduced in the late teens was giving the technology the ability to monitor people's micro-expressions, to monitor breathing rates, heart rate through fluctuations of blood in the face. You could do that before, but it wasn't that reliable. Then, of course, it was a fairly short jump through to imaging beyond the visible spectrum through infrared and ultraviolet. You can imagine very useful for security cameras, for health in terms of assessing people's body temperatures. And then the most useful thing has been the development of multipath LiDAR. LiDAR, we all know, is a way to allow cameras to perform depth mapping, so camera can basically tell how far an object away is from the camera just by the reflection of the photons. This has been really essential for home VR and, of course, augmented reality, not to mention 3D video conferencing and streaming. We'll talk about that a bit more in a couple of minutes, how that really unfolded. The multipath part is really, really important. I've got this sort of slightly dated illustration here. Multipath took quite a while to really perfect, but it allows these cameras to effectively see around corners. If you go and calculate quite a lot of computational power, at least at the time, it's quite easy to do now, but you could go and image in 3D sections of buildings or rooms that you don't have line of sight of. Because obviously, if you just have cameras in particular corners of a room, then there's areas that they can't see. If you have multipath, you can see behind objects. In fact, you can even see into objects. So now these cameras have total awareness. And actually, that's been a problem for some retailers because obviously some of the more advanced cameras can image multiple rooms at once. You need to buy fewer cameras. So that's a bit of a problem. So now I want to move on to the applications. The technology is all very well and good. It's fun to learn about, but what do we actually do with these cameras? Why are they so valuable? Well, the first thing is really to use these cameras as a baseline sensing platform. So most people these days obviously have some kind of device on their person, whether that's heads-up displays or glasses or a smartphone if you're old-fashioned. And the thing is, of course, if you don't have these devices, how do you interact with the technology in your home? The cameras provide that interface. So if you're an infant, if you're a child, if you're elderly and you don't have these devices, these cameras form as a kind of foundational interface for home technology. But they also act as a crucial foundation for high technology, like high-res virtual reality and augmented reality. The kind of LiDAR and sensing devices that we have in our wearable technology, pretty good, but it's not as good as the sort of thing that you can have in high-power home cameras. And so you can kind of see seeds of this, the use of static home cameras for VR and AR in even consoles as early as the Xbox with Kinect, and of course with the Lighthouse stations for the Vive and Oculus, if you remember those. Now moving on to other applications, security is kind of one of the most obvious ones that we used home cameras for. People really found, the early adopters really found the use of being able to look into your house while you're away on holiday or at work, really reassuring. It gave people a peace of mind to be able to see that their house hadn't been burgled or burned down, or their kids were okay, or it was being cleaned, or their pets were okay. And as these devices, as these home cameras started being networked with other devices in the home, such as locks and other kind of security features, the applications also spread. So for example, one of the innovations that developed home cameras was the use of snapshot timeline. So a lot of people started using services like Airbnb to rent out their houses. And of course, you ideally want to have the ability to kind of watch to see whether people smash up your house. Of course, it's pretty creepy to be filming them all the time. I don't think people, even now, would really sign up for that. But by using smart home cameras, they were able to take snapshots of rooms or scenes where there was no one there. So, for example, when people left. And you could go and use these snapshots to determine whether they really did break that particular thing, maybe whether it was your pet. So small things, but things that really lubricated the way for this so-called sharing economy. Also things like home delivery and home cleaning. Now, one of the things that I've used my home cameras for, and I think a lot of you have used home cameras for, is for exercise, guided home exercise. My doctor says I should do more yoga, more Pilates. I've got bad posture, bad back, so I use that at home. And of course, the camera is able to go and image my entire body in sub-millimeter precision in real time. So, of course, it can tell me how I'm stretching and how I should move, but also it can go and image how I'm breathing. And in fact, which muscles are being used or overused, even real-time calorie expenditure by looking at body temperature and things like that. High-speed cameras can image your tremors, so they can detect just how you're coping. So that's obviously in addition to things like heart rate and all sorts of other things. And so it's not 100% reliable. Obviously, these cameras don't replace doctors, but they are really able to detect some forms of sickness before you know it yourself, really. So going beyond the body, one of the things that's been really helpful okay. Looking. Okay, so one of the things that these are also very useful for was monitoring general health and well-being beyond the body. So when you have awareness, total awareness of all the objects and the state of objects within an environment, you can tell pretty obvious things like whether certain types of food are going off, they've been left out for too long, whether fruit is fresh, whether you should really clean that mug. That's what these cameras can sort of tell you to do. They can even tell you which surfaces need to be cleaned. Pretty useful in shared homes or student houses, although a little bit annoying. It gets a bit more interesting. You have, obviously, the ability to monitor really anything that's said or performed within the house. So a lot of parents find it quite useful for the cameras to go and monitor a child's activity in terms of how many words they speak, what kind of words they speak, whether they're learning English or different languages properly. How big is their vocabulary in real time? How well are they walking? How well is their eyesight? You can use gaze tracking to see whether they're having any problems with their eyesight. So it's really, you can't really put a dollar value on parents being able to have the knowledge that their child is growing up well. And I think that's been a huge driver for adoption of these cameras amongst certain demographics. And of course, when people signed up to that, then it was not difficult to also detect things like mood, the emotional state of individuals, also whether people are happy or depressed, that sort of thing. One of the more interesting effects of home cameras, a kind of second order effect, has been on the environment and the economy. So we all obviously have drones and robots in our houses. I've got a few, probably got a few. I know some people who don't have any. I know some people have got like 10 or 20. It's kind of ridiculous. And it's interesting because if you go back 10 years, I don't know whether you would believe this, but most drones and robots had a complete suite of sensors and tracking devices within themselves. So every robot and every drone would have its own LiDAR, its own camera, its own ultrasonics, all these sorts of things. Incredibly wasteful when you think about it, when you have high-resolution tracking devices that can just remote control these robots better than the robots can. So when you lose those sensors, you lose those components, you lose weight, and you save money. It's actually really, really valuable for the environment. And one of the other things that these cameras did was they reversed this kind of pretty crazy trend, luckily quite short-lived, of smart toothbrushes and smart water bottles that would go and tell you how many glasses you drunk. Of course, if you've got cameras, you don't need a smart toothbrush. The camera knows whether you're brushing your teeth. It can sort of tell by the angle of the toothbrush whether you're hitting your teeth right or not. And of course, you can tell how much water has been drunk. So we sorted that out. The toothbrushes are just normal now, just made out of plastic. So the glasses, I think we really dodged the bullet there. Another thing that was very helpful was that the powerful computer vision that powered these cameras negated the need for more older forms of tracking, of identifying objects like barcodes, QR codes, and RFID tags. These never really worked that well at a distance anyway. I mean, RFID tags were not great for a lot of reasons. And so when you have these ubiquitous cameras, you could theoretically track an object all the way from source to the factory, to the warehouse, to the retailer, to the home. So these cameras are obviously powerful enough to detect not just what a particular book or particular product was, but also distinguish between two seemingly identical products without any human readable information. So it seems like it's a small thing, but if you remove a barcode or QR code or RFID tag from every single retailable object, then you save quite a lot of money and waste. Probably the most common, sort of the killer app for these home cameras that I've used, and I think probably a lot of you have used every single day, was simply the ability to locate any object within the house. I can't keep track of how many times I lost my keys or lost my membership card, or where did I put that book, or where did I put that stapler, and you go and buy another stapler because you can't find the other one, and then eventually you find that you've got 5 staplers and they've got no staples in them. And so, that doesn't happen anymore. So you just go and ask the home, where's the stapler, and it'll tell you where you left the stapler. Right? Sounds like a small thing, but when you add it up, this is a few percentage of actual overall consumption, people buying stuff they lost or they already have. So it's actually been a huge, it actually sort of reduced GDP by a few fractions of a percentage, which sort of not really was what meant to happen. But of course, saved people a lot of money. So not if we have these cameras obviously keeping track of where these objects are, they're also tracking our usage of these objects. Now that took a bit longer to get working, but a few years ago. That allowed these cameras to really detect in advance when an object might need to be repaired, when it was likely to fail, common failure patterns, when you might need to replace it. And based on that, really calculating the value of the object, how it depreciates or sometimes appreciates in value over time. You do that for all the objects in the home, and you have a real-time value of everything in your house that you own. So obviously very useful for insurers, very useful for thieves if they get their hands on that data. These systems, of course, might recommend that you cycle or sell an object based on your usage. You could go and leverage the objects in your house because, for loans, if you wanted to do that. Or these cameras might also go and recommend replacements for objects you use a lot, or if it notices that you're not wearing this jacket, or you're not using that exercise bike at all, you might as well just sell it. So they've really provided a kind of second opinion for the sort of things that we buy, and really giving us advice on how to save money. Now, one very early application for these cameras was for fashion advice, believe it or not. Now, that still doesn't actually work very well today, but it does provide, these cameras, of course, provide very, very accurate measurements, body measurements for personalized clothes and accessories. The sheer amount of wastage in the apparel and clothing industry is just breathtaking. It's changed a lot now, but people would regularly go to a store and spend 10, 15, 20 minutes just trying on different sizes of clothes until they got something that fit. Sometimes there would be nothing that would fit, or a few years later they would go and order 10 different sizes of shoes or tops and then send back 9 of them, and the 10th it turns out they didn't like and they send that back as well. Just a massive expenditure in energy and just waste of money. And of course, now that we've figured out how to do customized garment printing and we have better body measurements, that's been reduced quite a lot. Not completely, obviously, but quite a bit. But that brings me really on to my next topic of behavior. Now, this is sort of really the most advanced and kind of most controversial application of home cameras. So to take those as an example, not only can these cameras obviously go and measure your body and how well your clothes fits, does this sort of hang well properly, but they can also see how often you wear your clothes and how they change your mood. This is basic reverse correlation. It doesn't need a lot of AI, but it can sort of figure out what kind of clothes you might wear on which day and how hot it is and who you're meeting even. So your home cameras now, of course, a lot of people use their home cameras, just recommend what clothes they should buy and what clothes they should wear, and also which clothes they should skip, even though they look good, but the camera knows that you're probably going to wear it once and just never wear it again. It looks flattering, but it's also going to be uncomfortable. So, it knows us pretty well, these systems. Now, of course, to do this well and to do a lot of the things that I've talked about well, it requires the exchange of personal data with retailers. So how does this work? Some retailers offer discounts, they offer kickbacks if you go and buy things based on your personal data. Some cameras are quote unquote free. You get them from the retailer for free. Of course, then they're locked into that retailer, so now you're buying everything from them. And then we have some cameras that are powered by open source software. They're a bit more transparent in how they move around data, although they have their own problems. So there are some wrinkles in this system. Now, where are we today? Well, behavior modification and behavior prediction has gotten pretty advanced. The most modern systems are able to track conversations and look at the semantic content of conversations. They can see who's speaking more in conversations. You can imagine that's pretty useful in some families, some groups. Perform gaze tracking, emotional monitoring of individuals and of families. They might recommend all sorts of things, improve the mood of your family and the happiness of your family, just by judging, whether, what people are feeling. It can sort of detect certain emotional states, not all of them. It can detect excitement, happiness, arousal, depression, that sort of thing. Really track these over time. There is a problem, of course, with exactly how you deal with children. Parents obviously being able to see into their children's behavior. That's kind of out of scope of this talk. So really, this behavior prediction is only made possible. A lot of these things are really only be made possible through these home cameras. I mean, one can imagine a world where there were no home cameras at all, and you were imaging everything simply through wearable devices, glasses, smartphones. But it just doesn't really seem credible that you'd be able to perform all these applications and do all these good things with just wearable devices. And so that's, I think, why we've seen such a massive uptake. And in fact, the other issue is that all of these applications, behavior prediction, safety, health, they work more the more data the system has. It's no good if you don't let these cameras into your bathroom or your bedroom. It's no good if you turn them off half the time. It's no good if you turn off the microphones, because then they can't detect the full suite of information they need. And then you also have the discovery problem. I've mentioned all of these applications, right? So how do people know that the cameras can actually do this? No one's going to watch a 30-minute video or read a manual before switching these things on. So, of course, the retailers simply had all these applications turned on by default. You can turn them off if you want. You can stop the camera from listening. But most people seem perfectly happy to have these cameras monitor everything in surveys. So we've known for a long time that we act differently when we're being watched. And it's true. We can see now that most people have these cameras, that we really don't do things anymore. We waste less, we spend less, we lend more, and we exercise more. We don't buy things twice. We don't buy things we don't need. Our clothes fit better, our food is fresher, our homes are cleaner, and our bodies and minds are slightly healthier. And we are happier, we think. Now, everything in our homes is watched, everything in our homes is known, and everything in our homes is optimized, including us. We've chosen willingly to be watched all the time. That's a decision that we made freely. And the question is, by whom? But that's for another talk. So, I know what you're thinking. No way will anyone sign up to this. I'm back in 2017 now. But this is obviously not hypothetical. I mean, I'm not painting, I think, some ridiculous future. Some of these things will happen faster than I expect. Some of these things may not be possible at all. But people have shown time and time again that they value money and convenience more than almost anything else. We already have millions of Echoes in the world. One of my friends, when I first showed her my Amazon Echo, was just kind of astonished that I had one. Next time I go and visit her, she has one in her bedroom, her bathroom, her kitchen, and her living room. So that's how that worked out. And now we have this Echo Show that was just announced a couple of days ago. Here in the UK, we have 6 million CCTV cameras out watching us in public. There was obviously a big fuss about this, not unjustified, in the 90s and early 2000s. And now no one cares. We're not seeing any reduction in CCTV camera usage in the UK. There's no uproar. And of course, worldwide, we have billions of smartphones that track us all the time. We don't really like thinking about this, but even on iPhones, even on more privacy-conscious devices, it's still obviously not difficult to go and find out a log of everyone's movements if you're really determined. Which is not to say that people are stupid for wanting home cameras. I think it's quite easy to see privacy as the ultimate good. I think that these home cameras will be simply just too useful and too cheap to avoid, a bit like smartphones and search engines and browsers. These are just too useful and too cheap to avoid. I think probably everyone listening to this talk will be aware of the privacy implications of using a phone full stop, having a web browser, and yet we still use them. So I don't think it's at all likely that we're going to draw the line at home cameras. But in any case, I think it's actually, believe it or not, quite possible to get too hung up on the current arguments surrounding privacy and advertising. Just to be clear, I think that personal data privacy is incredibly important, and I think that advertising can often have a very negative effect on our personal desires and our moods, but we shouldn't sort of hope for the worst. We should hope for some alternative. We shouldn't assume that present day practices of privacy and advertising will hold true in the future. Right now, we know that people aren't actually prepared to pay for the true cost of devices or services. These things that we think are free, are obviously not actually free. So people defray them by selling personal information or by introducing targeted advertising. It's targeted, obviously, because it makes it more relevant. But if you show people the true cost of removing ads, then it might be possible that people are prepared to pay more. It's just that they aren't given that option. And I think that's actually one really interesting area of attack, is simply requiring that people who provide products and services have an ad-free option. They can charge as much for it as they want, but this might be something that would be a useful strategy. Likewise, like right now, all our devices, particularly as we go into the glorious deep learning AI future, all these have to be cloud enabled, so we can crunch the numbers to go and do the AI and the recurrent neural networks and all the other buzzwords. And so we give up our data freely because that's the exchange. We give up the data freely, we make them cloud enabled so they work. But there are glimmers potentially of a different future. We know that Apple have announced this idea of differential privacy, which allows them to learn from user data, allows the AIs to learn from user data without compromising individual user identity. There's a recent paper published by Google suggesting a possible way of performing distributed machine learning that doesn't require user data to be sent back to centralized servers. Doesn't mean that they're actually going to do these things, but at least they're thinking about them. Of course, I would prefer if we didn't just hope that Google and Apple save us. Maybe Mozilla can do something about this. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna. I don't think that things are just going to work out fine. I think that present political events have shown that's definitely not the case, France notwithstanding. My point is that things can change, even cloud-enabled devices and pervasive targeted advertising. And I think actually that the presence of home cameras in people's homes might actually really focus the mind and get people thinking a little bit more about their personal data as people start walking around past their home cameras not wearing any clothes, right? So we need to argue for these controls. We need to make sure that people are aware of these issues. It is going to happen. I don't know whether it's literally going to be 1 billion shipments in 10 years' time, but it's going to be a heck of a lot of cameras in people's homes watching all the time, guaranteed. And we need to demonstrate why privacy is important, not just through arguments, but by producing competitive and superior products and services that have privacy and data ownership controls built in. We have to do this because this future is coming. It's too useful, too cheap to avoid. People aren't stupid for wanting these things. They perform really useful applications. And so I trust that Mozilla will fly the flag for privacy and control in the future as it has done in the past, not just on the web, but everywhere. Thank you very much.
Is the microphone box working? Can everyone hear me? I don't know if they can. Oh, okay. So, great. We'll go with the standby old school mic. So we have a couple of, so just as a reminder, we have many folks listening in outside of this crowded room. So we already received a few questions online. If you're in the room, don't be shy. Save that question. We'll get you a mic. I'm going to start with the first question. With the near constant surveillance being done and the general history of insecure devices, how do we protect information? Do we have laser pulse hats, ultrasonic noise generators, dazzle makeup? Thoughts?
I mean, the short answer is I don't know. I don't think that people are going to do any of these things. I think that it's just been demonstrated that people are not really willing to give up. I mean, the dazzle makeup looks cool, for sure. If you don't know what dazzle makeup is, it's like sort of kind of makeup that you sort of apply to your face so that cameras won't recognize a face. And that seems like it'll work for about 6 months, and then people will figure out how to get around it. I think that, you know, this is not something that is going to be solved from a technological standpoint, right? You can obviously, you can imagine things that will damage these cameras, right? So if you don't want to have the camera in your home, then you can not buy it. But if you go into someone else's home, what do you do about that? If you go into a workplace, what do you do about that? You can go fire a laser at the camera and short out its, you know, CCDs. You can certainly do that, but then you're going to get into trouble because you've destroyed someone's property, right? So you can wear, you know, a hoodie all the time, I guess, so when to recognize you, but then it can use gait recognition to track, you know, and figure out who you are. You can look at your devices. This is not something I think that we can really solve through technology. It's a policy issue. It's a regulation issue. You know, it's a legal issue. It's not something that we can do individually. You know, this is something where society has to come together and figure out what it wants.
Great. Anyone in London with a question? We can start here and we go to our other offices. We have one in the back.
Oh, microphone.
Yeah.
Move around.
Hi. Do you think our government is technologically sufficiently capable of creating or crafting a policy that the public understands and or even them understand? Like, I don't know, they are able to understand what the hell is going on.
I mean, you mean like the UK government?
Any government.
Any government. Look, I think you have to sort of, I'm not like a government expert, I think you have to distinguish between, you know, politicians and civil servants. I think that, you know, even, I mean, civil servants, they want to do a good job, you know, and they often get divided. I think there are a lot of smart people in government. I think generally speaking, politicians actually want to do the right thing. Even the Tories, believe it or not, or the Republicans, you know, I think that most people get into politics because they want to help people. But this is not a political priority. Full stop. You know, because people have shown again and again that they don't care. Voters don't appear to care about this sort of thing. That's why the Tory government has gone backwards in terms of privacy, in terms of the ability to, you know, they want to get rid of secure encryption. I mean, come on, right? So I don't think it's that they don't know. I think they do understand the technology. They just don't want to introduce these privacy controls because from a political standpoint, it doesn't really win any votes. Whereas if you go and say, we're going to require that we have the ability to hack into people's home cameras if we suspect them of being terrorists because you're afraid of terrorists, then they will get that. And the only way that you stop that from happening is by voting a different party into power or hoping that the politicians get smarter. So, you know, I think that there's just no will there to change that. I think they could if they wanted to. They could get the experts. The government has shown that it is possible. They know where the experts are. They just, you know, they can find them. They just don't want to find them.
Okay, we have another one online. A reminder to the other offices, if you have a question, maybe let me know on IRC so I don't ask and we wait for you to, so ping me on IRC, but ask the question. You have microphones there, so please ask. Another one through IRC is, can you think of some historical parallels, so going further back, I suppose, to such large concentrations of power and how it affected the democratic process, mass media, etc.?
Well, I mean, we have had centralized control of mass media. You know, I think that, you know, it's really interesting actually looking at US politics at the moment. Well, also really depressing, but very interesting because a lot of people talk about the media, the news media in America, and they sort of look back 30 years or 50 years and they think, wow, it was really great back then. You know, the news media reported things accurately. How come we can't have that? Well, back then there was a requirement that the news media were kind of impartial. That's and similar in the UK. You know, they had this bargain where they got free use of the airwaves, and then they had to go and air news programs that weren't like Fox News. But I don't think that was necessarily a great situation either, because you effectively had government control over news. I mean, not sort of direct control, but they set the rules of the game. And I think that I'm not sure that it's so bad that's a lot more open. And likewise, I'm not sure that it's so bad that we have all these devices. I mean, the question was, centralized control. I mean, another example would be the postal system. It wasn't that long ago in historical terms where people sent pretty much everything through the mail, and it was obviously possible for the government to go and read that mail until it wasn't possible. So, there are, this is not the first time that a centralized authority has theoretically had, that kind of level of information. The difference this time is that we're inviting it into our homes, and so it's something, when you write a letter, you're aware that you're sending information, whereas if you have a camera and it's watching you all the time, then you might not be aware of that. But, I don't want people to think of this as some sort of theoretical exercise. I mean, if the government wanted to go and, listen in on someone's Android device, they could just go and break in, hack your phone and then boot it and then just listen in all the time. They can do that now. They don't need a home camera to do that. They can do that to anyone if they really want to. This will make it a little bit easier.
Quick call for the other offices. Maybe wave your hand and ask a question using the microphone if you have any. Otherwise, we'll move on. I see one. Mountain View.
This is
Getting your-
awesome. Hello, my name is Marianne Avery. It is my third day here at Mozilla. But Adrian, I'm a big fan of yours. I've been following your work for 5 years. I'm fresh off 10 years at the Institute for the Future. So I will say that I feel very at home here, having a 2027 retrospective on my first week. And I absolutely love the talk, the storytelling. I'm listening for a lot of the signals and specific examples that I've encountered that I know fed into that story. And I'm thinking about one in particular called Cradle. Are you familiar with that, the eye tracking application? So a father had his infant son had a rare form of eye cancer, which manifests by a flashing whiteness in the eye. And he actually found some developers and created a program to look back through family photographs to identify signs of this particular kind of eye cancer and made it into an application that anyone could download. And that got me thinking about, I know the focus of this talk is privacy, but how might openness and making these sort of video technologies more accessible for people to play with and make things with help make this world that you've just painted a picture of more empowering, more aligned with Mozilla's hopes of what the world will be like?
Well, I mean, thank you for the question. I mean, this is not a plant, by the way. No, I hadn't heard of that. That sounds, I mean, that's a kind of story that gets a parent to go and buy one of these devices and turn it on all the time in the nursery, right? So, for better or for worse. So, in order to get that kind of great application and innovation, then obviously developers need access to these platforms, right? Amazon said, hey, if you want to make an application on Echo Show, you can go and download our SDK and we might approve it, your application if you go through this process, which sucks. It sucks in the same way that having to go through the App Store approval process also sucks. Or Google Play. We need to have the ability, as these devices do more, you need to have the ability to install, you run your own code on these devices. And I think it's going to be essential that developers are able to hack on these cameras, and But of course, you need to, like we also need to understand the reason why people have opted into the App Store, because it's safe. So, that's going to be a central question as to, developers are going to want to have access to the video feeds and to the sensor feeds of these cameras to do interesting new applications. But we're going to need to have an interesting, really, really powerful way of ensuring that people's privacy is protected. I don't have the answer to that. I just know that it's going to be a problem, because we need to do, there are genuinely useful things that these cameras can perform in terms of health, in terms of, entertainment as well. I mean, why not? But, we need to have a better solution than the App Store, and the Google Play Store and Amazon. We just can't live with that.
Any other offices before we go back to the London office? All right, anything in London?
One of the problems of all these devices is that the computers are remote, and we have to send the data so that they have enough power to make the computation. Do you think there is a market incentive to make this local on the device, which will help on privacy?
Well, I mean, that's certainly what Apple hopes, because one of the things they like, sort of touting about, for example, on my iPhone, the Photos app, it does object recognition and it does facial recognition on the device. It doesn't send your photos to the cloud. Google Photos performs all those calculations in the cloud. So it does make my phone get quite hot, when it's doing all those calculations, right? But it can do it locally, right? The phone is that fast. Is it as good as Google? I don't know. I suppose it doesn't really matter because I don't need that information in real time. So clearly, in principle, it's possible to do at least some of this stuff locally, right? I don't want to speculate about, how fast computers will get in the future. And like, I suspect there's probably quite a lot of room for just optimization of, computer vision in the future. Maybe we don't need like massive computers in our homes. We could just have sort of better designed chips, or different algorithms. I hope that there is an option for people to have all this stuff locally. Like, I think that would be a great option. I don't think that everyone is necessarily going to buy that option, but it needs to exist. Absolutely.
Any more questions in London or elsewhere?
Right here? Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anthony. I wanted to know what you call privacy in 2027. Because like 20 years ago, just sharing a picture of yourself on the beach or something, that's like if your mother received that, she would ask her, who is that girl on the picture or something, and 10 years later, it's very common that everybody knows about everybody's pictures and everything. And to react about what the woman was saying, maybe in 2027, the eye cancer app is just, now you can share that on Facebook and say, oh, my kid has cancer, and
yeah,
everybody can have a crying emoji about this something. So what is privacy in 2077? Maybe nobody cares anymore.
I think people are, I think our conception of privacy is changing, but that doesn't mean you can go so far as to say that young kids and the millennials and whoever, are not going to care about privacy. What people care about changes, and I think that, I know that people here don't think this, but a lot of policymakers, a lot of people who are older, they say, oh, these kids are Snapchatting all the time, they don't have an idea of privacy. Well, people choose, they turn this stuff on and off, right? I think the issue is when it's on all the time, and I don't think anyone really wants to go and be broadcasting all the time. So I think there's still going to be a conception of privacy in the future. I think the issue is that technology is changing so rapidly that, if you think it's bad in the West, just think about China. You know, they've gone. Some people have gone from literal, working as peasants in a farm to working, in skyscrapers on MacBooks. In the space of a generation, right? People, our intuitions about privacy and our understanding of what needs to be private and what technology can do and what it can't do. You can't change people's habits that quickly. And so I think that's sort of the most dangerous thing here, is that the capabilities of the technology and the platforms and the ability to share information is changing far faster than anyone's real ability to understand what the technology can actually do. Like, I don't understand what the technology can do. I'd never heard of this Cradle thing, and I read about this stuff a lot. Most people don't know that Google location services, Google tracking history, is often that people turn it on, or they just like click OK because they just click OK to everything Google says, and now there's a log of literally everywhere they beam with their phone all the time. People just don't know this stuff. So I think that I think people are very good at adapting, but the technology is changing very quickly as well. So they adapt kind of like 5 years later, basically, and so does the policy.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Yep. Great. All right. So could we create a localized system that allows consumers to do the same thing without sending the data out, maybe with lower cost devices?
Well, I mean, that's a similar. Yes, I hope so. I don't know about lower cost devices. I mean, I don't, I think one of the sad. This is going on a bit of a tangent, but in order to want to do this stuff, you need to be you need to feel passionate about it and have a sense of mission rather than wanting to get rich. I don't think. And I'm probably preaching to the converted here at Mozilla, but you wouldn't make a lower cost device that did everything locally and didn't sync to the cloud if you wanted money. Like, you're not going to get a unicorn with that, right? You get to sell like a $200 device and you never get any recurring revenues. Maybe you make some money from updates. Or if it's open source, you don't get anything. So, I hope that we do have those. It's not going to make anyone rich, but it's going to do a lot of good. So someone should do it, please.
Anything else in any of the offices? We have one more in London, and then we'll. Yep.
Hi. Something I found interesting about all the entities that might be kind of invading our privacy all through your talk is you were mentioning company names.
Yeah.
And not governments. So historically, if you think about like Orwell, for example, the big target was, the government wants to spy on us. But there seems to be a shift towards private corporations having access to all this data, even more data than governments, in which if you're crossing a border, they might want access to your devices because they have no other way for the information that big corporations already have. So these corporations being multinational, having access to not only the limits of their country, but global spectrum, is that a worry in terms of privacy becoming a way for certain non-governmental entities having way more power than they should?
Yes. Yes. I mean, we entrust a vast amount of data and personal information and incredibly sensitive personal information to these corporations, and you just have to hope that it's going to work out okay. And that's not to say that I think that there's someone at Google reading my email. Like, I'm not that interesting. I think they've probably got better, data access policies than that. But of course, anything's possible, I suppose. The reason why I didn't mention governments quite as much is simply to reflect the fact that that's apparently just not something that people seem to care about. And I think that's partly reflected by the fact that the governments partly have always performed surveillance, on citizens. We have CCTV. They've had the capability of surveilling citizens for a long time, and they use it, and they will continue to use it in the future, and we should be worried about it. But I think the difference exactly is that now you have corporations that can do that, and they weren't able to do that in the past. And I don't think corporations are necessarily better or worse than governments. They've got different incentives. I don't think they go out deliberately to irritate people. They're just there to make money, and if they can make money by violating privacy or by making you feel sad or happy or that sort of thing, then they'll do that. And we shouldn't need to live in that ecosystem if we don't want to. Oh, there's one.
It's less of a question, more of a statement, just because everybody's been asking about government-related stuff. So about 5 months ago, I worked for the Confederation of British Industry, which is the biggest lobbying company in the UK. And I know that the government kind of takes the business's view. So they represent 250,000 businesses in the UK. And they take kind of the policy advisors' views quite seriously most of the time and have a good response rate on the advice that that body gives the government. And they've, in the last year, set up a innovation department. So if you've got concerns, definitely even tweet the CBI and they'll start putting those kind of things, because the thing is there's still a smallish team, about 10 or maybe even less people, but if you've got those particular worries about things that should be addressed by the government, they do take it very seriously and have a good response rate on those kind of questions. So.
That's a good point. I should go and tweet them.
Thank you.
Nothing left on IRC. Any of the other offices have a question?
Funding.
You have the technology. Hopefully. All right, I think.
Is there a final question from the room?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Try one.
Last one.
Okay.
Thank you. You said that we switched from privacy being disclosed by the government knows everything, can surveil us, to having corporations being able to do that. Isn't the answer to have everything public so that nothing can be privately sold?
I mean, there's a really good book about this by David Brin called The Transparent Society. Have you read that?
No.
Well, you should.
My list.
It's from the 90s or early 2000s, but it's still kind of really interesting. And he argues for kind of radical transparency. He thinks, well, he kind of predicted, as one might, that we're going to have cameras everywhere and you can record everything and transmit everything over the internet. I mean, the issue is often what ends up happening is transparency for some, and a few people get to hide all the time, right? And so I just don't, I don't think it's. I think it's an interesting thought experiment, but I don't think it's something that. I don't know how you would actually do that. I suppose. What does that mean? Does that mean literally broadcasting every camera all the time? I don't think you necessarily mean that, but we have a power imbalance in terms of political power and societal power, and just people have more resources, and I think transparency will not actually solve that. In fact, it might make some things worse. So privacy is still important.
Okay, I think we have to cut it there. We've gone over the hour. But I'd like to thank Adrian for that exciting, if somewhat chilling, future retrospect, and for your very thoughtful responses to the questions from our team globally and in the room. Everyone, a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I get you that beer?
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to get a beer.
Yeah.